But I have a theory about why your ad creative is performing or not performing as well as it is. And I think lots of people are doing a poor job generating high performing ad creative because they're thinking about the process of creative development wrong at the baseline level. And so today on the show, I'm going to tell you how we develop creative, how we think about creative at AJF Growth, and how I think you should be thinking about it too, specifically by thinking about what parts of the creative development process are expensive and should be expensive, and what parts are cheap and should be cheap, and how you should think about both of those together to make better, higher performing creative at more scale for your brand, and ultimately have better performance and a better bottom line in the business. I'm going to tell you how and why right now. I've been thinking a bunch more about creative development and creative production, specifically the issue of the cost of creative production. And I've been thinking about it in part because of an episode I did with Taylor Holiday a couple weeks ago, because at AJF Growth, we're really looking deeply right now into building process around AI. There's actually so many AI tools coming out so fast, and it's so different than how creative was not that long ago, that for an agency to build creative processes around the use of AI is actually really hard. And I've been thinking a lot about what AI is good at and what AI is not good at. I'm going to have more thoughts on that and probably an episode on that at some point as we continue to develop our own thoughts. But frankly, my thoughts on it right now are just not developed enough for me to say much that I think is very useful. What I do think, though, is that there is a way of thinking broadly about creative that ought to be applied to the use of any tool that you use or not, or any person that is part of your team or not. And that is basically breaking down the question of where creative development and creative production is expensive and where is it cheap. And how should you think about organizing your team relative to those two things, okay? And let me lay out the big picture thought here first, and then I'm going to dive into each one of them. The big idea here that I have is that creative, at least right now, and maybe there's AI tools that are going to change this, I don't know. But I still think at this point that basically in any way you break this up, the actual development of creative ideas and angles is relatively expensive in your business. Now, I don't mean that as a percentage of your P&L. I just mean that as I guess I mean it as relative to other parts of the creative process. Okay, maybe another way of putting it is right now, developing good creative ideas, creative angles, the core messaging of your creative, the stuff that I've been talking a lot about recently, my episode with Sarah Levenger from a couple of weeks ago, thinking about consumer psychology, thinking about, like I said, the conversation with Taylor as I was sort of kicking around this idea of like, can you just fully sort of bully creative into spending by creating so much of it that something at some point works? You just created at so much volume. Thinking about all kinds of questions, some of the conversations I've had with Jess Bachman from Fire Team. And there's this question of like at what point in the process do you need to think the hardest and work the hardest? And what I'm sort of convinced of right now is that at some point in the creation of actual messaging, and I'm going to unpack that more in a minute, that part of the process at this point is still relatively expensive, and that's actually a good thing. It requires brands to think hard and work hard to do the things that make the biggest impact on your performance. The part that's cheap is the execution of the ideas themselves, the execution of the angles themselves, the production side of things. That's the part that is really, really cheap. And if you just take that and run with it, which is what I want to do on this episode, I think it helps you think really well about how to allocate your time, whether you're an agency or an operator or not, to have the best creative strategy at the most scale on Meta and really anywhere else that you're spending money, but especially on Meta because the cost of the distribution of creative ideas is so cheap. So let me restate it a little bit, and then I'll break it down a little bit more. Okay, so developing ideas is expensive. Executing the ideas is cheap. That's the basic idea. Developing ideas is expensive. Executing the ideas is cheap, and that's the way it should be, at least. Okay, so let me go through each one of those and tell you how I get there, okay? So let's start with this idea of the expensive part, developing ideas and angles. So what do I mean by this? I mean actually thinking through how your brand will uniquely communicate with customers in a way that is compelling and sells product. What is the core message? And at AJF Growth, we would say, like, what is the concept of the ad? What's the basic concept? And that would include the angle, again, the sort of format, those sorts of things. What is the concept of the ad? Um, Actually doing that is really expensive, and that actually is because it starts even earlier than I'm making it sound right now. It starts at the level of brand, and again, my conversation with Sarah Levenger, I think, was pretty helpful here, and I'm going to link that. And I'm also going to link my episode with Taylor that I just referenced a second ago in the show notes. I'm also going to link my episode with Jess Bachman, still one of my more popular episodes ever. Anyway. Something Sarah said that I think was helpful in that conversation was essentially that a lot of the conversations around consumer psychology and the positioning of your brand, or around consumer psychology, is not just about how you position a single ad, but actually how you position your whole brand and who you think about that. Now, that is expensive. I mean, it's expensive on a lot of levels. It requires thought work. It requires your design and copy to be considered carefully. It requires thinking about your product direction, your marketing calendar, how you approach seasonality in your business. If you are really taking a minute, or if you're really taking time to think through how your brand is going to communicate uniquely and communicate value uniquely to your customer, there's a whole bunch of work there. And so you have to be thinking carefully from the ground up about those kinds of things. And once you get to the level of an ad, again, Taylor got at the same concept in my conversation with him. When you get down to the level of an ad, that's really an outworking of the brand's basic positioning. And AI is not going to do that for you, right? There is no super fast super fast AI process or reduced price overseas employee. Actually, I mean, there could be a reduced price overseas employee in one sense, but you're still going to pay, even if it's an overseas salary, an executive level salary for that, basically, right? So maybe cheaper than in the US to do that overseas. And I think people should be thinking about hiring director, VP, et cetera, levels of talent, maybe even C-level talent in your business overseas, depending on how you're structured. So in that respect, cheaper than doing it in the US. But again, you're still paying a higher, somebody with a really deep resume, somebody who's thought about it hard, or it's a founder with equity or something like that. It's expensive. You see what I'm saying, right? Forget how you arrange the whole thing. You know what I'm saying? The time and the hours and the real deep consideration of those things costs a bunch of money. Again, maybe even just in the form of time. And that is the starting place of every ad angle you ever make, because this is going to get into your packaging and your product and your bundling and your pricing strategy and the total positioning of the brand, all of those things. Okay. And then there's another step in, again, something Taylor's been talking about recently that I've been thinking a ton about, which is this issue of moments. So how does that brand create moments in a marketing calendar that are really impressive? Well, that means product releases and collaborations and partnerships and influencer deals, and depending on the size of your business, it could be all kinds of things. But again, those require a lot of thoughtfulness and a lot of consideration. Whatever part of this process you are working on for your business, whether it is the more or less expensive part, you should be considering staffing part of it in the Philippines with my friends at More Staffing. That's who I'm using for my business. And if you're thinking about hiring in the Philippines entirely as virtual assistants at $5 an hour, you're thinking about it wrong. There's incredible talent across every part of the e-commerce ecosystem in the Philippines, supply chain operations, and yes, marketing, graphic design, video editing, all those places that you should be pursuing for your business. And it is a much lower cost to your OpEx than hiring that same talent in the US, despite that there's incredible talent with people with really deep e-commerce resumes who really know what they're doing and will be huge value adds from day one. And More Staffing can help you get to them because you will pay a competitive rate in the Philippines for a great quality person and a great quality job in your business. You will get access to the best talent there. More Staffing will help you find them. They will help you recruit, train, onboard, do all those things that make it so they are going to be set up for success in your business. And it is, again, as I said, how I've worked with my business and how I continue to staff up parts of my business. I just had my most recent hire from More Staffing started about a month ago. So go to morestaffing.co/AF. Sorry, morestaffing.co/AF to go get started with them now. There's even a guarantee. So if you hire somebody from More Staffing in your business and they don't last for a year in your business because they don't quite work out, they will actually replace that employee, help you replace that employee for free. So go to morestaffing.co/AF, tell them I sent you, get started now. And then from there, now you get down to the level of ad, and that often means starting by thinking deeply about your product and customer. One of the reasons that a lot of people's ads don't work very well is that they're not paying very close attention to what their customer actually tells you they care about. Like, just the classic thing here is just to go read customer reviews and to look when you're reading reviews, to go look carefully for like, what are people telling you about their lives and about their desires in their lives that your product is meeting? What are they telling you about that? You know, and again, there's so much you could say about this for almost any category. Maybe I just will make something up, or like a beauty product. I mean, if somebody buys a beauty product, they probably have some consideration for features and benefits. Does it go on smooth? Does it last long? Does it, I don't know, smell the right way? Like, I don't know. I don't use beauty products, but like there's that. But there's like a deeper layer underneath that, really obviously, which is that like how you dress yourself, present yourself, what products you use actually is about how you present yourself and show up in the world to the people around you. And that's going to come from the place of deep desires for a customer. And so for your brand to effectively communicate your value to the customer and to make sure that you can provide value to the right customer, you have to be tapped into those things and communicating about those things. And that is hard. And then that actually makes itself known in the form of words. This is why I say it's about ideas. When you're developing ad angles, you actually have to be able to communicate the idea in the form of words, probably before you can ever communicate it visually. Now, there's another version of this, right, where you just let the customer do it for you. You send your product to a million influencers and creators, and you whitelist and you try out, whatever. And I think that's totally a part of a brand's messaging strategy. But at some point, you're going to be creating your own ads, and you are trying to inhabit the voice of your brand in a way that resonates with the customer. And as you do that, that requires thought work and effort. And so many people, and I think one of the things, and maybe this is my fault, right, among others, like you hear the idea of create more ads and you think that means move really fast on this messaging part of things and just create more ideas. And again, maybe Taylor in our conversation that we had a couple weeks ago is right to some degree, that like, and you could just sort of create enough ideas and angles and variations and stuff at bulk that essentially you hit at some point. I don't know that I've actually seen that yet. And again, I'm really trying to be cautious about that. I'm just trying to express some skepticism because I think it could happen. I think there is power in that, and I understand the logic of that. But even if it does, there's still that step before that at the brand level. But right now, whether you've done that kind of deep thinking about brand or whatever, even if you're just straight up an ad agency developing ads, I think what I mean, which is that the best ads have at their core messaging that communicates value in clear and strong and in attention grabbing ways. Right? Clear attention grabbing ways. And that's not easy. That requires concepting and ideas in a way that is, and in a way that is difficult. I've said this before. Part of the reason I've said, if you've listened to or seen any of my content, my interactions with Jess Bachman from Fire Team, one of the things that they do that's really different than a lot of creative houses that I see in our space is that they really go and like storyboard full concepts where they're working through larger ideas about ads in a way that I think is doing something different than just like throw a million ideas at the wall and see what sticks. Now, again, I just think that I think there's some place for both of those in your total media mix, but I think this notion of thinking carefully about the messaging really matters. Thinking carefully about who your customer is really matters, and that's expensive. And I think for many brands right now that are struggling to produce value in their ad accounts, this is where the problem actually lies. And it may be they've done the media buying stuff that I talk about, that Taylor talks about, that CTC talks about, whatever. You're running manual bids and you've got a good campaign structure and you're thinking carefully about economics in your business and all those things. And you run ad after ad after ad and you can't figure out why you're not getting more scale. Well, it's possible that this is the problem, that you've actually tried to make the whole thing cheap and fast. And you need to slow down a little on thinking more carefully about your messaging. And the how-to that I see here, the best step that I take is I look really carefully at reviews, like I said. And I spend real time on this and I think through like, questions like, are customers expressing that they previously used a different product and now they use this? Did that other product work or not? If it didn't work, why didn't it work? What are they saying was the problem with it? How many customers are expressing that is the issue. Are customers telling you anything deeper about their desires? Did they tell you, I came in expecting X and it was delivered to me, in this? Are they telling you about how your product fits or feels or something? Because if it does fit or feel or look a certain way, and they're telling you that specific thing, what they're telling you is not just about your product, but what they're telling you about was their expectation of your category and of your product. And so then you want to turn around and communicate that to other people. Like an example I've talked about maybe at some point here is selling jumpsuits mixed by Nazarene, and that client that I've worked with for a long time, right? Not that we've like completely blown up that business or anything like that, but we've had success at times by just showing customers more about the details of the fit of a jumpsuit, because what we learned from hearing people talk was that many customers had very specific concerns about how jumpsuits fit. And so we wanted to address those in the ad level. And what a customer's telling you at that point, and now that's a very feature benefit kind of thing, but what a customer's telling you at that point is they have an expectation of your product in your category, and you need to speak to that as clearly as possible. And yeah, you can just throw a million ideas at the wall, and certainly in apparel, sometimes that really works, right? And but at the same time, there's something deeper going on here where if you can actually get into the mind of the customer and then think carefully about how to communicate, you could do really well. Now, I'll say at this point, this is where my ads typically all come out very direct and clear. If you've listened, my ads sound like my podcast in a lot of ways, where I have an idea and I am doing my very best to think about how do I communicate that idea as clearly as possible. And within some time constraint, how do I do that as well as I possibly can? Well, that's basically what my ads sound like. I'm trying to be direct, give an analogy if I need to, give a reference point if I need to, but be as direct and clear as possible while grabbing attention with a hook. Okay. So that part of the process is expensive. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes thoughtfulness, in my view. And so much of the time it takes somebody who can think and articulate in terms of actual words first, and then design and other concepting, format, all that stuff, video editing, all comes downstream from how do you communicate this idea better? What visuals can we use to communicate it better, right? What arrangement of the text can we use to communicate it better? What various hooks can we use to communicate it better? And this actually, that phrase, various hooks, gets me into part 2 of this, which is the cheap part. Okay, the cheap part that I said is executing the ideas. And here's what I mean by cheap. What I mean is you can generate so many variations of an ad in so little time after you have the concept done. So just the other day, I created ads for a client. Okay, and I had 4 concepts. Okay, I wrote those concepts out in about an hour and a half. Right, and those concepts also came from a couple hours before that of research around products, around seeing what other ads had worked, around reading reviews, all those things. And so I had spent a lot of time, a few hours at least, really thinking through basically what turned into 3 or 4 concepts, ad concepts. Okay, and the vast majority, let's say I put 4 hours into that. Okay, just me. We'll call it 3 hours. Okay, just me. Before it gets to any editors, before it gets to any other media buyers, anybody else who's coming up with ideas in here, I put 3 hours into thinking through these. Now, these are all still images too. So when I tell you that about the next part, just factor that in, because still images, just by definition, have less copy, less text, and therefore require a little less time to make. Okay, so I came up with what is essentially, I don't remember if it was 3 or 4 still image concepts. Then, in the process of writing out headlines and body copy, and short body copy, because again, it's still images, in the process of writing those out, from there, I went and looked at imagery that was available to me, and I wrote enough headlines, variations, to where the final combination of those 2 things produced, out of 3 or 4 concepts, 210 ads. Okay, and it's because I had multiple images for each concept, multiple headlines for each one, and when you did all that, sort of multiply them all together, you combine them all up. It did that. And I will tell you, of the 3 hours it took me to develop that, probably 2 hours was like research and thinking and working through ideas. And then about an hour was writing enough headline and image variations that gave me 210 variations. So another way of thinking about it is that I put a half an hour into, and the concepts were kind of related to each other. So I put like a half an hour, 40 minutes into each concept. And then from there, I probably wrote, this was like 4 concepts, let's call it a half an hour each, one half an hour per concept. And then I wrote from there enough headlines to create, like I said, 210 ads. New sponsor, and I am thrilled to tell you about it because if you know my show, you know I simply don't take sponsorship dollars from software companies, from services that I don't actually use. And so I'm excited to tell you about somebody I recommend considering for your business, especially if you are listening to the content of this show and thinking more about how to create great creative angles, great creative ideas, and how to message that all the way through the funnel. You should do it with my friends at FERMAT. FERMATcommerce.com. Go to FERMATcommerce.com and look into what I think is the very best post-ad click setup that I know of in the e-commerce space. And what I mean by that is FERMAT will help you develop full funnels. That means custom landing pages, of course. Landing pages is part of it. But also you can connect those landing pages to custom PDPs connected to specific ads. So you can sort of rearrange a PDP for a specific ad, and custom carts for the same thing. So you can develop a full funnel all the way through, and you can do it at speed and scale that is unparalleled in the space, in part because FERMAT is not just, in my opinion, the very best software for this in the world. It is also a service business. So that you will get paired with an account manager who will guide you through, give you access to all the successful tests they have run before for other brands, so that you have the knowledge of running like hundreds of A/B tests across all kinds of brands, across all kinds of spend levels. You get access to that knowledge so you can be guided in your process of developing high converting landing pages and high converting funnels much faster than if you did it yourself. I know this because I started working with FERMAT with one of my clients, and very, very, very quickly, within about a month of doing the kind of work I'm talking about in this exact show, all the way through the funnel, we saw our spend go up somewhere between 50% and 100%, like in the first month right away. It's been really good. FERMAT was not the entirety of that, but it was a core part of the strategy that happened. I became a believer right away, and now you're hearing them on this show. Go to FERMATcommerce.com. Get a conversation started. If you are especially in sort of the mid 7-figure, approaching 8 figures, and anywhere above that, and landing pages are any serious part of your strategy, you need to talk to FERMAT about them becoming a core part of how you are making that happen. Like I said, unparalleled scale and speed for doing that. I think with my client, we've launched like 20 landing pages in the first month. It's unbelievable. So go check that out right now, FERMATcommerce.com. Tell them I sent you. Why do I say that? Because now designers had to go edit those variations, but they move fast, man. They know we've got process dialed in now to move that really, really fast. And here's the key thing. What those little variations are is like, I would have an idea for a headline, and I was like, do I want to phrase it like A or like B or like C? And every time in my creative process, I have that thought. I don't pick. I write all 3 of them down because I could be wrong about the way headline A versus headline B versus headline C resonates with the customer. I could be wrong. And so I'm just going to try and express it all 3 different ways, sometimes more direct, sometimes less direct, sometimes with analogy, sometimes without analogy, sometimes directly referencing a comparison product, sometimes referencing a comparison category, like just playing with a million different ideas. Okay. And I go and write that, and I purposefully don't edit much. I just create variations. And that is the part that is extremely cheap, because once you've created, and the tools are getting better for this all the time, once you've created the basic outline of the image and the basic design of the still image and what the sort of template of the image is going to look like, the variations are just no problem. And so you can create them at scale. And so that's the part that you should be thinking about. How do I do this as fast as possible? And how do I do this at as much scale and as cheaply as possible? Because that allows you to then go and take an idea or an angle and test it really, really aggressively without having to worry so much about getting the execution exactly perfect. Now, if you take that concept and you plug it into the fact that the distribution of those 210 ads is hilariously cheap, then you really see how the whole thing works together. Because if you're running manual bids for other creative tests, now at the actual creative level, I don't have to make creative choices. I can let the machine learning sort out and the algorithm sort out which ones of these are actually best. I can just work within a concept and then let the like individual little execution varieties get worked out. I'll launch them all with bid caps and TROS targets and those sorts of things. Meta will scale the winners. It will spend very, very little money on the losers. And ultimately, my cost remains, again, extremely cheap on the execution of the ideas. That's the crucial idea. So the concept takes some time. And oftentimes people need to invest more there, but the actual variations don't. An analogy I like to think of for this is how pharmaceutical companies work, right? Pharmaceutical companies, the developing pill number one is extremely expensive. There's all this research and all this effort and FDA consideration and trials and whatever, all all the highly paid scientists doing serious scientific work to develop a new drug, right? And so pill number one costs a huge amount of money to make. But once you've made pill number one, pill number two is just a manufacturing issue. And so pill number two is like 3 cents. I don't know how much, right? But like extremely cheap. So what's the cost of the whole thing? Well, it's more expensive than pill number two looks. It's not just a matter of the cogs that go into producing the output. There's some thought work that has to go in at the top level. And I think many D2C brands fail in their creative because they conflate those two moments. They're thinking in terms of either, and they do it both ways. They create one version of an ad, and they don't know that if they just made one little tweak, so they just do the expensive part, and they don't have process set up so that one little tweak to the hook or something like that, could actually make it go so much cheaper. All you were was like an upload away from making an ad work because you just lost people on the hook. And if you would just create a process so that from the start you could launch a lot of variations of one core idea, you would give yourself a much better chance of success. And then a lot of other brands miss because they treat the whole thing like the cheap part. They don't ever actually do any thinking. They don't spend the time and get in a room quietly and just read and think and write and work through ideas and try to play with concepts. They just go cheap, massive scale, and they don't actually try to push forward and see what's really working and what's not, and make hypotheses and test hypotheses and all those things. They're just doing everything like it's cheap. Okay, if you can do both of those things right and build your operational process, your system, your team, your use of AI tools, whatever, to do both of those, I think that's the way you're going to create a lot of creative success, and you're going to have high performance. That's what we try and do with our clients, and it's worked really well for us. And the more I see other brands do the same, the more I see them really be successful.